morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. How do you keep your audience awake? And awake can be engaged, interested, paying attention. So 6 steps to help you keep your audience awake when you're public speaking, when you're presenting, when you're running a seminar, workshopping, even facilitating. Just some tricks that I know about, that I use, and I've seen other people use to make you more effective in the way you engage, connect, and keep your audience awake. So Peter Dew's my name. I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and it's a pleasure to be with you for this 30 minutes this morning. Some rules, a couple of new faces on the webinar, lots of old faces. Ask questions as we go. There is that question and answer box. I will either park the question and deal with it later on, or I will attend to it immediately if it aligns with what I'm saying. Good morning, Danny, just getting underway. Take notes. I do record my webinars, so this webinar is being recorded. So if I speak too fast or there's something you want to delve a little bit deeper, I'll make the recording available to all participants of the webinar. And more importantly, apply the knowledge I'm sharing with you to your own situation. So this is about engagement, keeping people awake. Can you think back to a seminar you've been in or presented and engagement wasn't there? Think of a seminar that you've got coming up that you're in charge of, you're running a workshop. What are you going to do as a result of today to increase the level of engagement, the level of keeping your audience on the edge of their seat? Questions as we go. If I do park them, I will get back to you. Questions after the webinar, 30 minutes. I can't spend a lot of time. So something may surface to you post-webinar. You have my email. You know how to reach me. Send that question to me and I'll be happy to deal with it. All right. So, underway. This is what I'm going to cover. Ask them to do something. As a speaker trainer, move to the back of the room or a different position in the room. Change your pace, your speed of speaking. This includes using pause. Tell an emotional story, an engaging story. We'll talk more about that later on. Ask them to comment on what's just been said. Ask the audience to add to what's been said. What does it mean to you? What are you going to do differently? I've just asked you to think about how this is going to apply to your own life when you're speaking or presenting. And sometimes you do need to give people a 15-minute break for fresh air, especially after lunch, the graveyard shift, and when you're running longer workshops, longer seminars like a 7-hour workshop or similar. So let's go through these one by one. So the first one is ask them to do something. And this can be done as an icebreaker. This can be done where you ask people to comment on their own situation. So one of the things I do, one of the workshops, is thinking and speaking off the cuff. Turn to the person next to you and draw up a list of all the different scenarios when you may have to think and speak off the cuff. Job interviews, appearing as a witness in a court of law, radio interviews, talkback radio, special occasion speeches, birthdays, weddings, funerals, parties at offices, so on. So I'm asking them to do something. I can do that any time during my 7-hour workshop. I can notice that they're zoning out, they're getting tired, and I can ask them to stand up, movement of course, stand up and find a new partner. What's the 3 most important things that you can do to prepare for a presentation, whatever your content is? So simply to keep your audience engaged, ask them to do something. Just one little aside, I mentioned icebreaker, so you could do this as an icebreaker. Please understand an icebreaker, in my view, needs to relate to the content of the workshop. So if I'm running a thinking and speaking off the cuff workshop, I'm not going to get people to stand up and introduce yourselves to the person next to you and tell them about your most memorable holiday. That to me is an icebreaker, bears no resemblance to my workshop around thinking and speaking off the cuff. Find a partner in the room, introduce yourself, and tell them as many examples of when you've had to speak without time to prepare, where you've had to speak off the cuff. That would be an icebreaker that then relates, and I weave the radio interview, the job interviews, the introducing yourself as you're doing right now. I'll weave that into the content of the workshop. So be wary of icebreakers that have no purpose, no relationship to your content. The beauty of this one is you can do it any time. So have 3 or 4 little ask them to do something that you can weave in as the energy of the room goes down. You'll see it. You'll notice that people are zoning out, or I need to do something. A mistake is to keep bulldozing through with your content, even though you've noticed an energy drop. That's definitely how you lose your audience. That's first tip. Second tip, move to the back of the room. Move to anywhere in the room. There's a little bit of science behind this, and I'll share that with you in a moment. One of the mistakes we do, and forgive me for remaining anchored in front of my screen in webinar world, but as a speaker trainer, one mistake is to stay locked behind the lectern or behind the table that we're training from. So just using the platform will help people stay engaged and awake. When you move to the back of the room or to the side of the room, and I love a flip chart off to one side of the room and a whiteboard off to the other, and if I'm doing PowerPoint, then the screen's in the middle. So I've got 3 points that I need to refer to just within a normal workshop, and I can move to the back of the room. Now here's a little tip. When you move to the back of the room and you stand by a person who may be texting, disengaged, falling asleep, and when you stand behind them, now you don't have to do this in any negative way, don't associate any meaning with them falling asleep. Just move by them and that'll energize them, and that'll make them aware that you're aware of where they are. Now, don't judge, because maybe they have a 2-year-old that has kept them awake all night. But the movement to that person, close to that person, within the proximity, will make them be aware, wake up, and maybe re-engage. Now, please understand, the tips for keeping people engaged still will not work if you deliver boring, uninteresting content that has no relevance to the audience. So you're still delivering good content, you've prepared, you know what their issue is, and you're giving them information they need to hear, they want to hear, that solves problems, and you just want to keep them engaged. There is no excuse for boring, irrelevant content to a group of people. I mentioned a little bit of science. Let me collect my drawing pen and all right, so for moving to the back of the room, I'll do this over here. So you may or may not know that most motor vehicle accidents occur when people are driving in a straight road. Yep, straight ahead. And they get tired and their eyes close. So most motor vehicle accidents where people fall asleep are in straight roads. People don't fall asleep doing hairpin bends or S-bends. They don't fall asleep doing figure eights around a racing track. They do fall asleep on straight roads. So eyes straight ahead. Today, unfortunately, you are looking straight ahead. So when you move to the back of the room, to the side and the front, I'm helping your eyes move in your sockets. So you now are going around a hairpin bend, a figure eight, an S curve, instead of straight ahead. Now, we've all heard of that thing called death by PowerPoint. Death by PowerPoint is when you put your PowerPoint slide up, your PowerPoint deck, and you leave it up for the whole 1 hour, 2 hours, 7 hours. And people are looking straight ahead, their eyes in their sockets. They will fall asleep. They will fatigue. They're driving in a straight line. So one of the things to, as well as moving to the room, and I'm going to do this right now for you, is to hit the B button, B for black on your PowerPoint. So you're mid-presentation, you've shown some data, now you want to have a chat. So the data's been shown, the picture's up, the graph, you hit B for black. Please understand the PowerPoint's still there. I've just hit the B button, so now you're looking at me, you've got nowhere else to look. So if I'm off to the side of the room, your eyes have now moved and followed me. When I want the PowerPoint back, I can hit B again. So as well as moving to the room, by doing B, if you're doing a PowerPoint presentation in presentation mode, the B brings the screen down, eyes now move onto you, and you've helped people stay awake. Use the platform, move to the back of the room, have a flip chart one side, a whiteboard the other side, keep people's eyes moving in their socket. If someone's lacking energy, tired, you can move by them, you can energize them, you can give them special attention. All right. Number 3, change your pace of speaking. If you get the same pace that goes all the time, you get in this regular, steady pace, and we've got an old National Federal Reserve Bank governor named Bernie Fraser. And there was a comedian on TV called The Sandman, and both of them had very slow and monotonous, unchanging voices. So much so that they became famous. And Bernie used to do adverts for Super, the Super of the future. Anyhow, that's enough. All I'm saying is you have the opportunity to change your pace. Also the volume. One of the things that they say is when you whisper, so you just soften your voice, people have to pay a bit more attention to hear you. One of the ways to change pace is pause. So you can use pause for lots of things, but pause before saying something important elevates the importance of what you're going to say next. So this is called the pre-pause. So before I say something really, really important, I'm going to pause. Does that make sense? That's the post-pause. So when you say something that you want people to interact with, you want people to cognitively process, don't keep speaking. The example most of us will know is that of the comedian. When the comedian says something and people laugh, they keep quiet. They shut up. They allow the laughter to run its full course. So when you say something that's of value and maybe complex, Just remain silent. Allow them 2 to 3 seconds to cognitively process what's been said. Does that make sense? That's called the post-pause. The pre-pause elevates the importance of what's been said. The post-pause allows people that gap to cognitively process what's just been said. And of course, when you speed up, the energy rises and the level of importance also is increased. So use your voice wisely in a practiced way to keep engagement going. Are there any questions? Thanks, Sarah. So changing your volume, what do you do when you have a crowd of people and you want them to come back and you speak louder, you call them and they just keep talking? That's a really good question. And we've all seen lots of people say, hey, can you come back? Hello, can you come back? And the other thing, and let me just find a pen, is they hold up a glass and ding, 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 ding. Can I have your attention? You know, someone wants to make a toast. That might work in weddings, but I wouldn't use that as a seminar speaker or a conference speaker or a workshop facilitator. One of the things you can do to bring people back is to whisper. When you start to whisper, you'll notice the volume of the room will come down, because some of the people will say, hang on, Peter's saying something, but I can't hear him. And then say a little bit more, and the noise in the room will gradually come down. What do most people do? As I mentioned, they speak louder. Can you all come back? Crowd goes up. Hang on, I need you to come back. Crowd goes up. Do it the other way around. Can everyone come back, please? I have a few things. Now, what I want to talk about is, and gradually you can bring the noise down. So several ways to bring a crowd back. The other thing is that visual cue. Excuse me, and I put my hand up and say, but I let people know in advance. So let's say we're facilitating. I've got about 9 people on this webinar. Form in groups of 3. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to have a chat about what have you learned so far. When I want you to come back, I'm going to ask you to come back and I'm going to put your hand up. Those of you who see my hand first, can you please stop talking and face the front of the room? So you'll be facilitating, you'll be in deep discussion. I'll put my hand up and about a third of the room will be compliant and they'll just stop talking and look at me. There's nothing worse than someone who's extroverted, who wants to talk, and the person they're speaking to stops talking, ignores them and looks at the front of the room. And so what they will do is they will also follow the observant person, the person who complies, the compliant person. And you create a ripple effect. And if you use a whisper as well, so now, can I get you all to come to the front? 2 or 3 passes and you'll bring the crowd back. Thanks for that question. All right. Now I've just got a chat. Okay, good morning. Thanks, Danny. I've just got your message. Questions? Any more questions? Moving on. Tell an emotional story that takes the audience on a journey. This needs to be a story that creates a visceral response. Even in the boring pre-start meetings that I spoke about while people were waiting to come on, in the mining sector, 6 a.m. every morning, the supervisor goes through the scope of work, maybe a safety message, a safety share, but that one emotional engaging story that creates a visceral in the gut, visceral response will wake people up. Classic example, in the mining sector, forgive me for any negative emotions I cause, but the mining sector tells me that this is one of the most profound stories. They did not fall asleep. They learnt so much. Was when a surgeon went on site and showed them images of people who had lost the skin from their hand. It's called degloving. Their hand has been degloved because jewelry has been caught in machinery and the jewelry's been ripped off along with the skin of your hand. It's called degloving. When you go to a mine site, you do not wear any jewelry whatsoever. No rings, you take it off. Earrings as well, because they get caught and then, you know, your ear gets ripped off. Probably not as severe as the degloving. That one particular story that the surgeon shared had a superb impact. After lunch, I tell my story of my first ever public speaking presentation. Most of you know that I stutter, and my first ever public speaking presentation was age 41 when I delivered my father's eulogy. So yes, I am afraid of public speaking. I'm a person who stutters. I've avoided it, and the first ever attempt at public speaking I choose is my father's eulogy. And then I go into the profound impact that has on me, and that creates an emotional response and people are engaged. I use this after lunch because I know many people struggle after lunch. They've eaten and the blood leaves their brain and starts to drain down. What emotional story could you use that creates that visceral gut response? Ask them to comment on what has just been said. Good morning, Rachel. We're towards the end of the webinar, but I am recording this webinar, so you will get the recording. This is about keeping people engaged, keeping them awake. Ask them to comment on what has just been said. Ask them a question. So Danny, which of the 5 I've covered so far do you think would be most appropriate for your own personal use? What do you think, Elsie? Type those comments in. Now I've put you on the spot. Now you don't have to do that. So I spoke about pre-start meetings, 6 a.m, people falling asleep. The supervisor notices who's awake, who's engaged, who's not. And by name, you can call them out and say, so Bill, thanks Elsie, you've actually answered that, tell an emotional story. So Elsie has been listening to the webinar. So ask people a different question. So what do you think about that, Bill? And Bill's going to sit up, eyes open and say, look, sorry, Peter, I've just, can you repeat the question? I just zoned out for a little bit. Now I use that in my workshop quite often, and people generally only do it once because they know that I will be observing their level of engagement, whether they're awake or whether they're asleep. Now, once again, when I ask someone a question and they don't have the answer, I don't place any meaning on that. So they've fallen asleep in my seminar. All right. I don't know if they've got a 2-year-old child. I don't know if they got called out in the middle of the night. They work as a medical scientist, they work as a doctor. I don't know if they maybe have some other crisis within their life that's preventing them from sleeping. Certainly, if I was at a pre-start in the mining sector and someone was sleep deprived, you probably wouldn't want them to operate heavy equipment. So ask them to comment. What do you think? How would you deal with that situation if you were in my shoes? And I've got the main road, the straight highway, once again, eyes straight ahead. So in asking them to do something, they generally will think about how to answer a question. But death by PowerPoint is straight down the road, falling asleep at the wheel. So once again, you need to keep the audience's eyes moving in their socket. All right, I'm just going to pause for a moment as we wrap up towards the last tip. So any questions? So Stephen's asked, isn't asking someone a question when you know they're asleep, isn't that a little bit unfair and putting them on the spot? Yes, it is. It does catch them out, but I allow people to zone out once. I guess the second and third time, if they zone out, clearly the problem could be me, that I'm just not engaging and the content's not relevant to them. What I find is the adrenaline flows when you get asked a question and you can't remember, you can't recall what's just been said, and the adrenaline flows and people now stay awake. Once again, I don't assign any meaning to them falling asleep. So I'm not thinking they're uninterested. I'm not thinking that they're a bad person. They are just very tired at this point in time. And if it's a continual thing, then maybe my content is boring. So thanks. Get people to have a break, a 15-minute break, or get some fresh air. And this can be within the room, have a break within the room. I've been to a seminar in Singapore. It was a conference. There was multiple speakers, so it's not one person's fault. But after lunch, a young gymnast, a young fitness guy named Eugene comes on and he does a 10-minute where we pretend that we're running, we move our hands and then we swing right to left. And within 5 minutes, he's got our heart rate up. We're engaged. Our brain is flowing and we cannot fall asleep. Then everyone gives him a round of applause. He sits down and the next speaker comes on, but the audience is revved up. Now, I don't know what you can do to re-engage people when they need that break. One of the things I do, especially after afternoon tea, is I notice that people are getting tired, fatigued, long day. I will get them up and do a little bit of an exercise. I'll get them to walk, to change seats, to go and speak to someone. If they need a 15-minute break, then break for morning tea or afternoon tea, break early. And where I train often, I like to have a place where we can have morning or afternoon tea inside, but there's also outdoor al fresco tables and chairs, and I often get people to come outside to bring their tea and coffee outside and get some fresh air. Fresh air is really good. So 6 ways, not the only ways, but 6 ways that I often use to keep people awake, engaged, to just re-energize the room. Ask them to do something. Turn to the person next to you. What are 3 things that are important to you? Move to the back of the room. Stand behind their chair. Move to the side of the room. Keep the eyes moving in their sockets. Change your pace of speaking. Increase the speed. Slow the speed down. Tell an emotional story that creates that visceral, that gut response. Ask them to comment. Ask a question. Which one of these are you going to use to keep your audiences awake and more engaged the next time you present? 15-minute break, fresh air, exercise, whatever you need to do. So as I'll pause for any last questions, I've got upcoming workshops in Perth, also in Darwin in March. They're all on my website. Webinars, January, so I will be relatively quiet for the rest of December, early January. 30th of January, how to write a speech. I got feedback from my Christmas newsletter. You know, what would you like to hear about? So I'll ask this question again. In 2020, what 30-minute short, sharp webinars would be of value to you? How to write a speech, 13th of January. How to use storytelling when public speaking. We've heard about emotional, visceral stories, help people engage, help keep them awake, but how do you craft a story? So make use of me. If you have any requests, any particular areas you would like me to focus on, workshops in Perth, Darwin, over to Melbourne in May, a whole host of things that I still need to schedule on my calendar for 2021. 20. And we also do in-house corporate workshops. What are you going to do to keep your audience awake and engaged? Ask them to do something. Move around the room to the back of the room, stand behind the person, change your pace, tell a story, ask them a question, give people a break. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.